What do you know, guys? We're back at having these amazing conversations and our weekly cyber JA weekly cyber article reviews in 30 minutes. And we seek to address a number of questions from week to week as it relates to all the current happenings taking place within cyberspace and GRC. And there are so many things that are actually happening that affects the way organizations operate. And one of the main focus of having this conversation is to highlight and to bring context to some of those issues affecting the way we carry out or execute our various cybersecurity functions within our organizations. And we seek to address a number of questions in relation to our article for discussion today. And for many of us, this might be something that you are already familiar with. You might have heard about this before, but it remains quite current for today based on um, the way organizations operate. And the article that we're looking at is entitled A Sarbanes Oxley Act. That's the SOX IT Compliance Primer. And that's written by Anthony Israel Davis. And I will place a link to this article in the description. So, based on the article, we are going to be discussing a number of questions or areas based on the article itself. I mean, diving into things such as what does financial reporting have to do with cybersecurity and compliance? What is Section 404 of the Sarbanes Act in terms of its requirements? What are the auditors seeking? As it relates to the requirements of this act. Now, to share in our conversation, we have Jonathan Fisher, Paul Robinson, Chris Carter, Nate Knowles, who will be providing their expert view on this article. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me in this awesome conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great. And for many of us, as it relates to the Sarbanes Oxley Act, this act of came about in 2002, often abbreviated as SOX, and is a United States federal law that was enacted to protect investors from fraudulent accounting activities by corporations. And it was passed in response to a series of high-profile corporate scandals such as Enron, and many persons do not like to um when they talk about Enron, so many persons have so many memories. There are so many things in relation to Enron. But and also welcomes. But SOX established strict regulations and requirements for financial reporting, internal controls, and corporate governance. So I believe that this is. I think there's an issue.
No, I think Chris is having an audio issue. He's going to fix it.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So just to okay, so great. So guys, as it relates to the article itself, can you? I mean, there must be a number of pointers coming out of this article. Some of you might have had, I mean, certain experiences, certain flashbacks in relation to SOX, and not to mention Enron, um, in relation to all that actually took place in that particular event that actually led to the development of this particular act in of itself. Paul, would you like to start in terms of giving your view on this article
Yeah.
itself?
Yeah, and you bring up Enron, and it's kind of out of the pages of out of something horrible comes something very good. And the SOX Act, when it was put in, it came from something pretty horrific and financially damaging for a lot of people. But SOX really serves as a foundation, the founding mother of really transitioning businesses to understand how connectivities play a part inside of the organization, but then also the security controls that we need to have around connectivity. In 2002, you think back to 2002 and our use of the internet, up until now, 2023, it's just changed drastically. Like, I don't know any organizations that aren't reliant on technology or connectivity to produce a good business. So SOX really saw that and set the standard of, how to act wisely and securely in an environment of commerce as you build things out. Nothing new under the sun, like you said, SOX 2002. But I think it's always good. We don't. The saying goes, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So I think this is a really good time to kind of take a step back and see the foundations and the infancy of where this started, with all the compliances that are coming out and things like that. This was a really good article to kind of bring it back to the basics and say, what are we really trying to accomplish when building out a cybersecurity program?
Great. Nate, what's your take on this article?
Yeah. So once again, thanks for having me on, man. This is very cool. Um, when looking at this article, the first thing that pops to mind is, the old school additive of checks and balances, right? Prior to everything becoming digital, we had, paper, pad, and pen and pencil, right? And there were checks and balances that were established prior to this digital age that we're in now. So it's checks and balances version, I don't know, you want to call it 10 or 12. So being able to look at your IT infrastructure, you see the data that you have that they're holding, right, within whatever hardware software that they have, right? So it introduces a new way, an exciting way of doing things, but then there are possible windows for fraud and other things like that, like you mentioned Enron, and there, I'm sure there's been a lot of others since Enron. So um, to me, it's a validity of a process that needs to continue to upgrade and improve. That's what I think of when I read the article.
Okay, sure. And definitely, Jonathan would possibly have a number of pointers coming out of that article itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we think back to, when this was enacted, it was an actual law, not too many laws that really affected IT security coming before this. I mean, you kind of had the HIPAA coming out before this or around the same time. But, this one I think was the biggest one to really start having people think more about how are we being compliant? How are companies managing our data? And then, the fact of this, the SOC, how are they managing our financial data and our financial well-being? Um, I mean, I was still kind of a young buck when this came out. I just graduated high school a little bit, a few years before this. So, it was kind of really new, kind of getting into the world, understanding it, and then seeing all this happen. And you think about it, this was 2002. Here we are 21 years later, and we still have issues. If you start thinking about what's all gone on with the crypto in recent years, what's gone on with even some of the banks, and some of the leadership up there, that they've had time to ingest this, and yet there's still an issue. So I think it's great that we are taking that time to kind of go back to, as Paul said, kind of the roots of how some of the financial checks and balances that we have on IT, and really the importance of IT within that financial institute, that it relies so much, especially now with how digitalized everything is, how much everything is relying on technology, to really understand the importance of what the SOC is and how it can help organizations make sure that, one, they're being compliant to a law, but then they're also being held accountable and responsible for the use of our data and of our financial well-beings.
That's very important. One of the very key things that I really like about regulated industries, and so often we speak about the fact that the cybersecurity industry is not regulated. However, we have many industries that actually have their own sets of regulation, and it would be maybe very good in terms of the benefits that can be derived if there was actually an holistic regulation that governs everything that has to do with cybersecurity. But I think that possibly, I mean, they're actually working towards that. But one of the good things as it relates to the fact that out of this situation affecting in relation to Enron is the fact that as it relates to the regulation, then there is that sense of accountability, giving assurance. And coming out of the article is the fact that the auditors are now asking for certain things based on the standards, based on the requirements of this particular act, that once a company is actually operating publicly traded entity, that is, then they have to be accountable in certain areas. And as a result of this, then organizations or companies in that falls within this category, they are being audited against certain requirements. Now, based on the article itself, what the auditors are seeking. So can you, I mean, anyone can actually provide their input in terms
Yeah.
of the value of what it is that auditors are actually looking for in relation to this act itself.
Yeah. I'll give my homeowners analogy. The only way I'm able to understand this stuff is through analogies. So I'll use a simple analogy here. So I have a lighter in my hand, and if I set it off and I set my desk on fire, ultimately setting my house on fire, I'm going to jail for arson because I willfully, the law is you cannot set your house on fire. So I'm going to jail for that. If I'm talking with you all and I forgot that I had my breakfast on the stove and I set my house on fire that way, okay, that's negligence. That's not being smart. And to kind of tie that into what the auditors are looking for is that you're obeying the law. SOX, Jonathan, as you said, is a law. It's not a, well, maybe we'll do it, or risk is too expensive. It's like, no. If you break this law, someone is going to face some sort of litigation. Part two of that is that they're looking for the functionality of how you're obeying the law. So, going back to, okay, I'm talking to you guys and, I'm negligent with cooking my breakfast. Those are the things that are going to come out. Auditors are just making sure that business practices are being done in an appropriate way. It's that simple. We make a real, I think we trip ourselves up because we make this bigger than what it is. And yes, it's big. Yes, this is important. I don't want to diminish that, but it's just basic business practices that we have to have in place. And because we live in a connected world and a teleworking world and things like that, auditors are just seeking that we are following the law and that we are limiting our liability and negligence as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. If you don't mind, if I could jump in on and
Sure.
piggyback on Mr. Paul there. Yeah. So, you know, it's the checks and balances, right? It's also a way to, you know, if we keep in the more simplistic terms when it comes to financial institutions, it's a way to validate that the books aren't being cooked, at the end of the day, or there is financial data that leaks out to the point where other people can benefit from it because they have information prior to, like, say, for example, when the stock market opens up, right? I mean, I know we talked a lot, this is, Enron went through this, but, there's others, there's WorldCom, and more recently AIG and Lehman Brothers, there's so many that this is, events like Enron that have happened. And the fact that we've had SOX since 2002, fast forward to 2023, I mean, Lehman Brothers and AIG was only a couple years ago. So what does that tell us? It means that SOX is a great beginning, right? And Rashay, as you said, we need to come to some sort of holistic approach where you don't have audit and compliancy just for financials, and then you have another one for manufacturing, and then you have, we have HIPAA for the medical fields, right? We need an all-encompassing, audit compliancy solution that everyone has to abide to, because when you have different compliancy needs based on your vertical or industry, that gives way to cracks in the wall, right? And this is why you've had AIG happen in the past and Lehman Brothers most recently. So yeah, it's common sense, and sometimes we make it too difficult, way too confusing. It's as simple as, hey, what are the change controls that you've had? Okay, you are implementing a new solution, a new software solution for your financial uh, team, right? So you want to make sure you test that out before you put that into production. That's common sense to me. You just don't implement something brand new and say, hey, let's put this on our production environment. You know?
Yeah, that's a very. You were saying something,
Uh,
Jonathan?
I was going to jump in. I mean,
Oh,
if you want to say something, I can
no, sure.
wait.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean, just kind of piggybacking on that with both Paul and Nate. Like, when we talk about the SOC, everyone thinks it's really difficult, it's really hard, but just the big thing is to know that there are multiple sections, and not all of them depend specifically on cybersecurity. So if we just really look at what the cybersecurity requirements are, right? So if you are the cybersecurity analyst, if you're one of the risk analysts that's in charge of doing it, and the big thing is like, hey, what does Section 404 state? What are those things that they're looking for? And when you look at it, the controls a lot are just the basic type of controls, like Nate was saying. It's just the common sense stuff, right? Are you doing change management? Do you have the physical and logical access management set up that people are having to sign in with a unique username, password, that we're not sharing stuff? Do you have backups, or what type of disaster recovery, right? How are you scheduling everything? It's all the basic stuff. And so it's not that difficult when you kind of break it down into those small sections. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to work for an organization where we had to really focus on the SOC controls. But I have been in organizations where I've done a SOC 1. A little different, a different acronym, but in the way it is another financial, and this one's an actual audit where you actually get a certification from the AICPA. And in that one, yeah, it's kind of defining what the controls are, what you want to do, right? There's guidelines, but not really a set hard stance of like, here's the checklist of this and this and this, right? It's more of, what is your company doing to be able to ensure that the data is secured, that you're being able to process, the information correctly and be able to store it right. And then off of that, then the auditors are then able to create the controls and build out an audit based on that. So it's the organization's kind of detailing what they're doing with the guideline of how to do it, or what needs to be done overall.
We also have to get better at answering the question why are we doing this. A lot of these compliances and checklists and things like that we have, we just do it, and we run into problems when we can't answer to the why, especially to the executive and board level, because you can pour all this money into SOX, and then your CFO sees all the money that you spent and you're in the red, and there's really no immediate return on investment. So answering the why, again, analogy, we're going camping as a family, this summer. And, I remember the first time they went camping. I hate camping, by the way, but that's another podcast for another day. But my wife was like, hey, you need to pack a raincoat. I'm like, but I just checked the weather. It's, 3 days of sunniness. Why would I have to pack a raincoat? She's like, trust me, you have to pack it. And of course, being a husband, I didn't do it. And sure enough, the first night that we had, it was a rainstorm that I'd never seen waterfall from the sky at that level. It was absolutely incredible. But, then I'm sitting there wet, soaked, everybody else is dry. I'm like, oh, so that's why. So we got to get better in our industry of saying this is why change management is important, not because we want to be a business inhibitor or we want to be, we want to make life difficult or spend money that we don't have. But if change management is exploited, here are the legal ramifications and here are the business ramifications if we don't do it. And I've seen organizations that can answer the why get very, very far in this process and just bake it into their corporate culture, because that is what we see that works.
Sure, that's a very important point. But looking particularly at Section 404, and I mean, it has a number of sections within the Act itself, but particularly Section 404 focusing on those controls, security IT control measures that ought to be implemented. And as what Jonathan was saying earlier, that these are things that actually exist that are not that difficult. It's a matter of the approach that is taken to actually deploy and implement these various controls. One of the things I really like about this act is the fact that it is not it is open to the organization to choose whichever best standard. For example, ISO 27001, the CIS controls, whichever they can apply in more easily, depending on the capabilities of that organization to provide that level of security control measures within the organization. Now, Nate, based on your experience looking at what the auditors are seeking, it says that auditors need to know that IT controls regarding financial systems and processes are in place and assure the effectiveness of those controls. In practical IT terms, this means that they want to know that controls are in place to manage risk, that data, and to ensure accountability for the controls to protect the data as comprehensively as possible. Some primary control areas are change management, physical and logical access management, disaster recovery, that involves backups, automated processes. Now, based on your experience coming from a more technical side, are you seeing any differences here that is being requested in relation to other control measures that you would have implemented, possibly to meet any other compliance requirements?
So what I've excuse me. So what I've seen in the past and what I've seen now obviously are night and day, right? I think now people are starting to understand that data is the new currency, right? The more data you have, the more advantage you can have, like for example, over a competitor, especially in the financial industries, right? So if you can have a one up on your competitor, or maybe even two up, depending on what kind of data you have, it can pay off leaps and bounds. When it comes to the protection of that data, um, what I'm seeing now is that you have, and everyone's familiar with the CISA zero trust maturity model, right? We have all those protective measures from the device, the network, the application, and workload, identity, and now there's more of a focus on that fifth pillar, that data level, right? So not only do you have to protect your data based on uh, things that are just a standard anymore, like snapshots and backup and recovery, right? You need to find a way to show a full chain of custody, right? A recording of every single piece of activity that's being executed against the data itself, right? So no longer can you say, well, I have something scanning over the network to protect my data. I need that protection at the data layer, right? So this is what I'm starting to see now, right there. I'm starting to see that people have a greater understanding now of that. Okay, this is my data. I want nothing to happen to it. So I'm going to have backups of that copy. I'm going to have a tertiary component where I have a copy of that data offsite, whether it's in the cloud or, you know, some other MSP. I'm seeing a lot more of that. Um, I'm seeing that backup solutions are now also integrating a cyber security component to them as well, right? Which I find I find interesting, right? So if you have a backup recovery component or like a backup recovery solution that has cybersecurity embedded in it, it protects the backup data. But there's a rare discussion about protecting that data from a cybersecurity component in your production, right? In your DR, right? So these are the changes I'm really starting to see happen. I mean, you're looking at things like Gartner. Gartner said in, I guess this year. I know, I'm sorry. Yeah, this year, 60% of all storage solutions should have some sort of cybersecurity component embedded in it, which is 10% higher than what it was last year as a requirement. And that's just going to grow more and more. So yeah, so the changes that I see, it's a focus on the last line of defense, right? Which is where your data resides. That's the biggest change that I see. And that end, it's more than just having snapshots to protect your data to recover from said cyber threat. You need to be able to stop it as well.
Exactly. So, I mean, we could always, there are so many elements of those controls, technical controls that we could actually dive into based on the things that the auditors are actually looking for. Because that's one of the main focus of this compliance act in of itself is that the auditors definitely need that assurance that all the necessary controls are actually in place to prevent a similar event that actually took place back in around 2002 with that Enron case to ensure that all these necessary things are actually in place to deal with these various situations that can actually occur. And there's so much to learn. I mean, coming out of this article, that just about businesses of any nature, not just those that are publicly traded or very large entities, but even to look at this article and to look at all of those items that have been listed, um, things, I mean, monitoring, for example, change management, all of these various things that they list in terms of file integrity, monitoring. And one of the main things coming out of this is integrity. Um, Maintaining the integrity of data, the availability of data, the confidentiality of data, um, are some of the key things that they try to bring from this article itself. So no, we're actually down to 1 minute of our 30 minutes, guys. So what are your final uh, thoughts on this article in terms of the quality of the article and the importance of all that has been actually documented there?
Yeah, it looks like
I'll jump
Chris
in.
added something. Oh, go ahead. I
Oh,
was
no, no,
going to
no. Go
say
for it. Go for it.
Chris added something on the chat. I guess he's having problems with the audio, but he said, bottom line for publicly traded companies, controls must be in place to prevent fraud and protect shareholder interests. So that's a great
100%.
statement. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a great statement. Fiduciary responsibility. That's what it comes down to. So
Yep. So, guys, if there are no further inputs, then definitely there's so much that to be gained from this particular article. And every week when we look at these happenings within our environment, then we recognize that there's so many commonalities that actually exist among the various incidents that are actually taking place. And it boils back down to the organizational structure, the management, the governance that they have in place, the various controls, the frameworks. There's so many things that can be used. So it's a matter of actually finding the best approach, the best strategy, and always having that contingency plan in place to ensure that there is continuous um, operation in light of what can possibly happen to prevent an organization from executing its day-to-day functions. So, guys, there you have it in our
Yes.
another weekly article review. So, guys, until then, same time, same place. Um, so that's it. A wonderful rest
Same
of your
bat
day.
time, same bat channel. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Great.
Have a good day.
Hey, have a good one.